Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to dive right into a truly paradigm-shifting analysis of a cultural ritual that honestly we all think we totally understand. I mean, you've definitely seen them on your feed, right? Those viral, super emotional videos of someone coming out to their family. They're almost universally framed as these beautiful moments of vulnerability and triumph. But what if the very language we use to describe that moment and the whole celebration that comes after it is actually masking a much deeper, systemic issue? Today, we're exploring a fascinating new framework that asks us to look way past that neatly packaged happy ending and start examining the walls that were built long before that moment ever happened.
Consider this incredibly powerful quote from author José Benegas. He points out that the conventional coming out narrative basically just assumes the individual was keeping a secret completely of their own volition. Like our culture treats the act of speaking as the act of finally stepping out into the light. But if we pause and really unpack this, we realize that assumption completely shifts the responsibility away from the surrounding environment. It places the entire burden of this secret squarely onto the shoulders of the individual. Why do we just accept that hiding was their default state?
We're going to unpack his highly provocative essay that systematically dismantles standard parenting and cultural norms. And what's cool is it does this without taking political sides. It just strictly follows the data and logical frameworks. It's actually a really short 30-page essay that was just published on Amazon Kindle, and it's available in both English and Spanish. I was genuinely amazed at how effectively such a concise piece of writing tackles such a massive cultural assumption. It's a brilliant example of using psychology, legal theory, and statistics to completely reframe how we view family dynamics.
So here is our roadmap for today's Explainer. We're going to cover 1. The coming out ritual, 2. Closet versus confinement, 3. The pre-closet phase, 4. Parental duty and law, and finally, 5. Changing the conversation. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. The coming out ritual. Re-examining the happy ending.
Benegas argues that this seemingly joyous ritual actually functions as a sort of collective amnesia. Just think about the standard components we always see. There's the nervous disclosure, the tears, the tight embrace, the whole "I love you no matter what" speech. Now, obviously, this is well-intentioned, but Benegas points out that the structure carries a hidden implicit pardon. It subconsciously implies the child was previously being dishonest by withholding the truth, and now the parents are magnanimously forgiving them for that. The celebration just jumps straight to the resolution. It places the burden on the person who had to hide, rather than asking the really uncomfortable question, wait, who made hiding necessary in the first place? It completely erases years of development where the child felt they couldn't speak and shifts our focus entirely to the relief of the parent rather than the trauma of the child.
All right, moving to Section 2, Closet versus Confinement, the Violence of a Metaphor.
This is where Benegas presents a core thesis that just completely flips our vocabulary upside down. He argues that no child chooses to walk into a closet. Think about what the traditional metaphor of the closet actually implies. It implies a wardrobe, right? A safe, warm place you enter voluntarily to hide your stuff, where you control the lock from the inside. In that metaphor, if you don't come out, well, you just lack courage. But Benegas argues a much more accurate term is confinement. In confinement, someone is placed there involuntarily by an external authority. The lock is on the outside. So escaping isn't just a personal coming out, it's a necessary act of rebellion against an unjust structure. The walls of this confinement are built around the child by the culture and the family, literally long before the child even realizes they're trapped inside.
Section 3. The Pre-Closet Phase, the Data and Psychology of Hiding.
Let's look at the hard data because it perfectly illustrates this forced hiding. Looking at generational surveys from Gallup, the author concludes that society isn't suddenly getting, biologically more gay. Instead, earlier generations were just heavily stigmatized into hiding. Today, over 20% of Gen Z identifies as LGBT+, compared to a mere 1.8% of the silent generation. That massive gap? It shows us that earlier generations had the closet violently enforced upon them. They learned the stigma and the danger so thoroughly that they simply never disclosed their true selves. They literally took that identity with them to the grave.
And consider this absolutely staggering number, 65%. There's a 65% increase in non-heterosexual identity reporting when studies remove the fear of judgment by using veiled, anonymous responses. This comes from a National Bureau of Economic Research study, and it essentially proves that even our statistics have a closet. When the threat of societal or family judgment is removed, the numbers jump dramatically. So the essay argues that a parent who just assumes their newborn child is automatically heterosexual isn't making a harmless guess. They're actively ignoring a statistically robust probability, and they're setting up an expectation that the child might eventually have to break.
So how exactly does this happen in practice? It's through what psychologist John Stuart Mill calls the pre-closet phase.
Through casual jokes, maybe an uncle's offhand comment, or just persistent heteronormative assumptions about future opposite-sex partners, a child learns that something is shameful long before they even develop their own sexual awareness. It's a form of vicarious learning. The essay highlights a super unique psychological burden here. Unlike, say, racial minorities who share their identity with their parents and find a validating protective buffer at home, gay youth are typically raised by parents who do not share their identity. As a result, those very parents often inadvertently transmit the exact prejudice that's going to harm them. Just think about how incredibly isolating that must feel for a kid.
As Benegas says, the closet is built before there is anyone to put inside it. The essay frames this preemptive shame as an act of parental negligence, even when it's done without an ounce of malice. By the time the child reaches adolescence and realizes who they already have this inverted certainty that their parents' love is conditional, that they will only be loved if they match the heterosexual expectation. The real tragedy here is that the harm didn't require active cruelty from the parents. It only required the right silence and the right assumptions. The closet was already built, and it was just waiting for them.
Section 4. Parental Duty and Law. Negligence and the Duty to Prepare.
This brings us to the legal and philosophical stakes. Benegas draws on classical liberal philosopher John Stuart Mill, who argued way back in 1859 that bringing a child into the world without preparing them for life is essentially a moral crime. Mill's concept of a duty of care is absolutely vital here. A child is an independent being, right? They aren't just an extension of their parents' ideological or religious beliefs. Therefore, raising a child in an exclusively heteronormative environment that statistically harms a significant chunk of the population directly violates that child's right to an open, healthy future. Failing to prepare for the statistical probability of having a gay child isn't just a minor misstep, it's a failure of a parent's most fundamental duty.
And what's wild is that modern civil law already has the tools to hold parents accountable for this documentable harm. Let's look at how different regions handle this. In Argentina, their civil code establishes objective liability. This means parents can actually be held legally responsible for harm to a child's psychological health, regardless of whether they intended to cause that harm. Intent doesn't negate the damage. Over in France and Spain, recent bans on conversion therapy specifically cite parental authority as an aggravating circumstance because they recognize that massive power imbalance. And while the U.S. is definitely more fragmented, state-level bans are increasingly recognizing that minors need rigorous protection from harmful practices by adults in positions of trust. The essay suggests the legal foundation is already there. We just need to culturally apply it to the negligence of building the closet.
Finally, Section 5. Changing the conversation, freedom requires naming the jailer.
So what does true freedom actually look like here? The essay asserts that true freedom isn't just the state stepping out of the way and decriminalizing identities. That's not enough. True freedom means holding the family accountable for violating a child's freedom before they were even old enough to defend it. It means acknowledging that millions of people were confined by a structure they had zero part in building. For us, this means completely shifting our focus. Instead of just celebrating an escape as a personal triumph, which, let's face it, leaves the oppressive system completely intact for the next generation, we need to address the root negligence of the jailers. We have to focus on repairing the very foundation of how we raise kids.
I'll leave you with this final, provocative shift in perspective. It fundamentally changes how we view what it means to be free to simply exist. If we stop asking when someone will find the courage to come out and start asking who built the walls of their confinement, how might that change the way we parent, the way we speak, and the way we love? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the structures around you.